The courtroom doors swung open, and Judge Harold Mitchell returned to his bench with a scowl that could have frozen water. His face was still flushed from the earlier exchange with Denzel, and his movements carried an air of irritation. He slammed his gavel down once more, silencing the murmurs in the gallery before turning his attention back to the case. "Let's move on," he snapped, glaring at Denzel. "Do you have any witnesses to call, Mr. Carter?" Denzel stood up, his posture relaxed but professional. "Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to present video footage taken by a security camera near the intersection where the incident occurred." This announcement caught everyone off guard, including Judge Mitchell. The judge leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing skeptically. "Video footage? You're telling me there's actual evidence of this alleged green light?" "Yes, Your Honor," Denzel replied calmly. He reached into his folder and pulled out a USB drive, which he handed to the bailiff. "The camera belongs to a nearby convenience store. It captured the entire scene, including my vehicle approaching the intersection." The bailiff plugged the USB drive into a laptop connected to a projector. Moments later, the video appeared on a large screen mounted on the wall. The footage showed a grainy but clear view of the intersection. Cars moved slowly through the foggy night, their headlights barely piercing the haze. As Denzel's car approached the traffic light, it slowed down momentarily before proceeding forward. Judge Mitchell squinted at the screen, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. "Pause it there," he barked, pointing at the moment when Denzel's car crossed the intersection. The bailiff froze the frame, revealing the traffic light partially obscured by construction barriers. "Zoom in on the light," Judge Mitchell ordered. The image expanded, showing the faint outline of a green bulb glowing weakly through the fog. Though not perfectly visible, it was enough to cast doubt on Officer Lawson's claim that the light had been red. "Well?" Judge Mitchell growled, looking at Denzel expectantly. "What does this prove?" "It proves that the light was green, or at least appeared green under those conditions," Denzel explained patiently. "Given the poor visibility and obstructions, it's reasonable to assume that I acted based on what I believe to be true. There's no evidence to suggest I intentionally disregarded the law." The judge clenched his jaw, clearly frustrated. Each piece of evidence Denzel presented chipped away at the prosecution's case, leaving him with fewer options to discredit the defendant. He turned to Lisa Monroe, who sat quietly observing the proceedings. "Ms. Monroe, do you have anything to add?" Lisa hesitated for a moment before standing up. She adjusted her blazer and addressed the court. "Your Honor, while the defense has raised valid points about visibility, the burden of proof still lies with them. We maintain that running a red light is a violation of traffic laws, regardless of external factors." Her words were measured, but there was a hint of reluctance in her tone. Even she seemed unsure whether pursuing the case further was worth the effort. Denzel noticed this and seized the opportunity. "With all due respect, Ms. Monroe," he said, addressing her directly, "the law requires certainty beyond a reasonable doubt. In this case, the conditions created significant ambiguity. Without conclusive evidence proving I ran a red light, it's unfair to hold me accountable." Lisa glanced at Judge Mitchell, then back at Denzel. She opened her mouth to respond, but closed it again, seemingly at a loss for words. Instead, she sat down, signaling that she had nothing more to contribute. The judge sighed heavily, rubbing his temples as if trying to ward off a headache. This trial was spiraling out of control, and he knew it. Every attempt to undermine Denzel only highlighted the young man's intelligence and preparation. For a brief moment, Judge Mitchell considered dismissing the charges altogether, but doing so would mean admitting defeat, something his pride wouldn't allow. Instead, he decided to shift tactics. "Mr. Carter," he began, his voice laced with sarcasm, "you've certainly done your homework, but let's be honest, this isn't Harvard Law School. You're just a kid playing dress-up in a courtroom." Denzel didn't flinch. He met the judge's gaze with unwavering calmness. "I may not have a degree, Your Honor, but I've worked hard to understand the principles of justice. My goal today isn't to win an argument. It's to ensure fairness prevails." His response earned nods of approval from the spectators. Some even whispered words of encouragement, though they quickly fell silent when Judge Mitchell shot them a warning glare. "This isn't a popularity contest," the judge snapped. "And don't think for a second that smooth talk will sway my decision." Before Denzel could reply, the courtroom door opened and a middle-aged woman entered hurriedly. She wore a plain blouse and jeans, her hair tied back in a loose ponytail. Spotting Denzel, she made her way to the front row and took a seat, giving him a small smile. Denzel recognized her immediately. It was his older sister, Angela. Angela had always been his biggest supporter, encouraging him to pursue his dreams despite their family's financial struggles. Seeing her there bolstered his confidence even more. He gave her a subtle nod before refocusing on the judge. "Is there anyone else you wish to call to testify?" Judge Mitchell asked gruffly, eager to wrap things up. "No, Your Honor," Denzel replied. "I believe the evidence speaks for itself." The judge frowned deeply, tapping his pen against the bench. He turned to Officer Lawson, who looked increasingly uneasy. "Officer, are you absolutely certain about your initial assessment? Because if this goes to appeal, we'll need solid grounds to stand on." Lawson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I'm confident in my observations, Your Honor, but yes, the conditions were challenging." "That's not exactly reassuring," Judge Mitchell muttered under his breath. Louder, he added, "Very well. Let's take another short recess while I review the evidence." As the courtroom emptied once more, Denzel joined Angela in the hallway. She hugged him tightly, tears glistening in her eyes. "You're amazing, Denzel. I'm so proud of you." "Thanks, Angie," he said softly, returning the embrace. "But it's not over yet. The judge isn't going to give up easily." Angela nodded, wiping her eyes. "I know. Just promise me you'll keep fighting. You've got this." Back, inside the courtroom, Judge Mitchell reviewed the photographs, weather report, and video footage one more time. Try as he might, he couldn't find a way to refute Denzel's arguments. The evidence painted a picture of uncertainty, making it impossible to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Denzel had committed the offense. When the session resumed, Judge Mitchell wasted no time delivering his verdict. After reviewing the evidence presented, he announced reluctantly, "I find insufficient grounds to uphold the charge against Mr. Carter. Case dismissed." A wave of applause broke out in the gallery, startling the judge. Spectators rose to their feet, clapping and cheering for Denzel, who remained seated, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. Even Lisa Monroe offered him a respectful nod, acknowledging his victory. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Denzel, eager to hear his thoughts. Cameras flashed as microphones were thrust toward him, but he handled the attention gracefully. "Today wasn't about me," he told them. "It was about proving that everyone deserves a fair chance, regardless of their background. Justice should never discriminate." Angela stood beside him, beaming with pride as the crowd cheered. Among the reporters was Lisa Monroe, who approached Denzel after the media frenzy died down. "You were incredible in there," she said sincerely. "Have you ever considered pursuing law professionally?" Denzel smiled faintly. "I've thought about it, but circumstances haven't allowed it yet." "Well," Lisa continued, handing him her card, "if you change your mind, give me a call. I'd love to help mentor you." Denzel accepted the card gratefully, tucking it into his pocket. "Thank you, Ms. Monroe. That means a lot." As the sun set over downtown Chicago, Denzel walked away from the courthouse with Angela by his side. The weight of the day's events lingered, but so did a renewed sense of purpose. He knew this victory was just the beginning, a stepping stone toward a future where he could fight for justice on a larger scale. Little did he realize, however, that his journey was far from over. The ripple effects of his triumph would soon inspire others and draw the attention of powerful figures who weren't ready to let him rest on his laurels. The tension in the courtroom was thick enough to cut with a knife. Judge Mitchell glared at Denzel, his face flushed with frustration. He had expected the young man to crumble under pressure, but instead, Denzel stood firm, composed, and ready to fight back. The judge's attempt to intimidate him had failed miserably, and now everyone in the room could sense that something unusual was unfolding. "Officer Lawson," Judge Mitchell barked, trying to regain control of the situation. "Continue your testimony." Lawson shifted uncomfortably in his seat before standing up again. He adjusted his belt and cleared his throat, visibly uneasy. "As I stated earlier, Your Honor, I observed Mr. Carter driving through the intersection when the light was clearly red. There's no ambiguity about it." Denzel listened carefully, his expression calm and focused. When the officer finished speaking, he raised his hand slightly, signaling that he wanted to respond. Judge Mitchell rolled his eyes but nodded curtly. "Go ahead, Mr. Carter," he said, his tone dripping with impatience. "Thank you, Your Honor," Denzel began, his voice steady and respectful. "Officer Lawson, you mentioned that the light was clearly red. Can you describe the conditions at the time? Was there any fog or construction activity affecting visibility?" Lawson hesitated for a moment, caught off guard by the question. "Well, yes, there was some fog," he admitted reluctantly. "And there were roadblocks near the intersection due to ongoing construction work." "Would you say the fog was heavy?" Denzel pressed gently, his tone polite but firm. "It wasn't too bad," Lawson replied quickly, though his voice lacked conviction. "But it didn't obscure the traffic lights." "I see," Denzel said, nodding thoughtfully. Then, without missing a beat, he reached into his folder and pulled out a stack of photographs. He walked over to the judge's bench and handed them up, along with copies for the prosecutor and Officer Lawson. "Your Honor, these are pictures taken from the same intersection on the night in question. They show the exact location where the alleged violation occurred." The judge flipped through the images, his brow furrowing as he studied them. The photos revealed a scene shrouded in dense fog, with construction barriers partially blocking the view of the traffic signals. Even someone unfamiliar with the area could see how challenging it would have been to determine the color of the light under such conditions. "What is this supposed to prove?" Judge Mitchell demanded, though his voice carried less certainty than before. "It proves that visibility was severely compromised," Denzel explained patiently. "Under these circumstances, it's entirely possible, even likely, that Officer Lawson misinterpreted what he saw. Furthermore, given the angle of my vehicle relative to the light, I may not have had a clear view either." A murmur of agreement rippled through the gallery. People leaned forward in their seats, intrigued by Denzel's methodical approach. No one expected a defendant representing himself to present such compelling evidence. Even Lisa Monroe, the assistant district attorney, assigned to oversee the case, looked impressed. She sat quietly at her desk, jotting notes and occasionally glancing at Denzel with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. Judge Mitchell, however, refused to concede. "Even if visibility was poor," he snapped, "that doesn't excuse braking the law. You still had a responsibility to stop and ensure it was safe to proceed." "Absolutely, Your Honor," Denzel agreed, nodding emphatically. "I accept full responsibility for ensuring safety. However, the law also states that drivers must act based on reasonable judgment under the circumstances. In this case, the conditions made it difficult to ascertain the status of the traffic signal. My decision to proceed was based on what appeared to be a green light, not recklessness." The judge clenched his jaw, clearly struggling to counter Denzel's argument. For a man accustomed to dominating courtrooms, being outmaneuvered by an untrained defendant was infuriating. He turned to Officer Lawson, hoping for reinforcement. "Is there anything else you'd like to add, officer?" Lawson hesitated, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Not really, Your Honor. I stand by my original statement." "Very well," Judge Mitchell said gruffly. He turned back to Denzel, his scowl deepening. "Do you have anything further to present, Mr. Carter?" "Yes, Your Honor," Denzel replied confidently. He retrieved another document from his folder, a weather report detailing the atmospheric conditions on the night of the incident. This official report confirms that heavy fog blanketed the area around 5th and Main during the time in question. It supports my claim that visibility was significantly impaired. The judge skimmed the report, his frown growing more pronounced. Every piece of evidence Denzel presented seemed to chip away at the prosecution's case. Sensing weakness, Denzel pressed his advantage. Additionally, Your Honor, he continued, I'd like to point out inconsistencies in Officer Lawson's account. He initially stated that he saw me run the red light from a considerable distance. Yet, according to standard police procedure, officers are trained to confirm violations up close to avoid errors caused by poor visibility or obstructions. Given the conditions described in the photographs and the weather report, it's unlikely Officer Lawson could have accurately determined the status of the light from afar. Lisa Monroe raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by Denzel's knowledge of police protocols. She exchanged a glance with her colleague, who shrugged in response. Neither of them had anticipated such a thorough defense from someone without formal legal training. Judge Mitchell slammed his gavel down, cutting off Denzel mid-sentence. Enough! This isn't a lecture hall, Mr. Carter. Stick to the facts. My apologies, Your Honor, Denzel said smoothly, unfazed by the interruption. I merely wanted to highlight the discrepancies in the prosecution's case. With all due respect, the evidence suggests that I acted reasonably under the circumstances and did not violate any laws. The judge stared at Denzel, his expression a mix of anger and disbelief. How could someone so young and inexperienced dismantle the prosecution's arguments with such precision? It was maddening and embarrassing. To make matters worse, the spectators were beginning to whisper among themselves, their murmurs tinged with admiration for Denzel's performance. Unable to tolerate the situation any longer, Judge Mitchell decided to take drastic action. Mr. Carter, he said sharply, are you suggesting that you know more about the law than trained professionals? No, Your Honor, Denzel replied calmly. I'm simply pointing out that the law is designed to protect fairness and justice for everyone, regardless of background. I've studied it extensively because I believe understanding the law empowers individuals to defend their rights. His words struck a nerve. Judge Mitchell's face reddened once more, and he gripped the edge of his bench tightly. You think studying online articles makes you an expert? This isn't amateur hour, son. Denzel met the judge's glare with unwavering composure. Again, Your Honor, I never claimed to be an expert, but I do believe that preparation and knowledge can level the playing field, especially for those who might otherwise struggle to navigate the system. The courtroom fell silent. Everyone watched as the confrontation unfolded, sensing that this was more than just a traffic case. It was a clash of ideologies, one man wielding authority and prejudice, the other armed with determination and intellect. And despite the odds stacked against him, Denzel was holding his ground admirably. Finally, Judge Mitchell threw up his hands in exasperation. Fine. If you're so confident, let's see how far your little research project gets you. We'll reconvene after a brief recess. With that, he banged his gavel and stormed out of the room, leaving behind a trail of stunned faces. As soon as the judge disappeared, the gallery erupted into hushed conversations. Spectators praised Denzel's poise and intelligence, while others speculated about what would happen next. Meanwhile, Lisa Monroe approached Denzel cautiously, her curiosity getting the better of her. That was quite impressive, she said, offering a small smile. Where did you learn to argue like that? Denzel returned her smile politely. I've always been interested in the law, ma'am. Life taught me early on that knowing your rights can make a big difference. Lisa nodded thoughtfully. Well, keep it up. You're doing a remarkable job. Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked away, leaving Denzel alone with his thoughts. During the recess, Denzel stepped outside for some fresh air. As he leaned against the courthouse steps, he reflected on the events of the day. He knew the battle wasn't over yet. Judge Mitchell wouldn't give up easily. But he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about proving his innocence anymore. It was about showing that anyone, regardless of background, could stand up for themselves and demand fair treatment. When the recess ended, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Everyone wondered how Denzel would fare in the next round, and whether Judge Mitchell's temper would boil over completely. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. Denzel Carter was proving to be far more than anyone had anticipated. 3 years passed, and Denzel Carter's life had transformed in ways he could never have imagined. From the young man who once stood nervously in a Chicago courtroom, he had grown into a confident law student with a clear sense of purpose. His days were filled with lectures, late-night study sessions, and internships at legal clinics, where he helped people navigate the complexities of the justice system. Though the workload was demanding, Denzel thrived on it, knowing that every lesson brought him closer to achieving his dream of becoming an advocate for fairness. Northwestern University became a second home to him. Professors praised his sharp intellect and dedication, while classmates admired his ability to simplify complex concepts. Despite his growing reputation as one of the brightest students in his cohort, Denzel remained humble. He often reminded himself of how far he'd come, from teaching himself law through borrowed books to sitting in classrooms alongside peers who had spent their entire lives preparing for this moment. Angela continued to be his biggest cheerleader, attending every event Northwestern hosted for its law students. She marveled at how much her little brother had accomplished, especially considering the challenges they'd faced growing up. Their family had always been tight-knit, but now there was an added layer of pride. Even Angela's kids looked up to Denzel, calling him Uncle Lawyer, despite his insistence that they wait until he actually earned the title. As graduation approached, excitement buzzed around campus. For Denzel, the ceremony wasn't just a personal milestone. It was a chance to honor everyone who had supported him along the way. On the morning of the event, he woke early, dressed in his cap and gown, and took a long walk through the city streets. The crisp spring air carried a sense of renewal, mirroring the journey he'd undertaken over the past few years. When he arrived at the auditorium, the atmosphere was electric. Families milled about, snapping photos and exchanging hugs. Denzel spotted Angela and her kids near the front row, waving enthusiastically when they saw him. Nearby, Lisa Monroe sat with a group of faculty members, smiling warmly as she caught his eye. Over the years, she had become more than a mentor. She was a friend who believed in him unconditionally. The ceremony began with speeches from university leaders, each emphasizing the importance of using legal knowledge to serve others. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for, the presentation of diplomas. When Denzel's name was called, he walked confidently across the stage, shaking hands and accepting his diploma with quiet dignity. As he posed for a photo with the dean, the audience erupted into applause, cheering louder for him than for any other graduate. Afterward, during the reception, friends and strangers alike lined up to congratulate him. Some shared stories of how his case had inspired them to pursue careers in law or activism. Others simply thanked him for proving that resilience could overcome even the toughest odds. Denzel listened intently to each person, grateful for the connections he'd made and the impact he'd unknowingly created. Lisa pulled him aside at one point, her eyes shining with pride. "You've come so far, Denzel," she said, handing him a small envelope. "This is my gift to you, a letter of recommendation for your first job application. Wherever you go next, I know you'll make us all proud." Denzel accepted the envelope with gratitude, promising to keep her updated on his plans. Truthfully, he already had a vision for his future. After graduation, he joined a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing free legal services to underserved communities. It wasn't the most lucrative path, but it aligned perfectly with his values. Every day he worked tirelessly to help clients fight eviction notices, challenge wrongful arrests, and secure custody of their children. Word of Denzel's work spread quickly, earning him recognition beyond Chicago. Journalists profiled him in national publications, highlighting how his own experiences shaped his commitment to justice. Speaking engagements followed, where he urged audiences to see the law not as an obstacle, but as a tool for empowerment. "Knowledge is power," he often said, "and understanding your rights is the first step toward change." Back in the judicial world, Judge Harold Mitchell's legacy continued to unravel. The State Judicial Review Board ultimately decided against removing him from the bench, but issued a formal reprimand for his conduct during Denzel's trial. Public trust in Mitchell eroded further, and he found himself presiding over minor cases with little significance. Some colleagues speculated that retirement loomed on the horizon, though no official announcement had been made. For many within the legal community, Mitchell's downfall served as a cautionary tale about bias and accountability. Discussions about reform gained momentum, with lawmakers proposing measures to increase transparency and reduce prejudice in courtrooms. Denzel's case became a cornerstone of these debates, cited as proof that systemic issues could and should be addressed. Meanwhile, Officer Greg Lawson quietly transferred to a different precinct. Though he avoided public comment about the trial, those close to him claimed he felt remorseful about his role in the incident. A few years later, he attended a training seminar on implicit bias, where speakers referenced Denzel's story as an example of how assumptions could lead to injustice. By the end of the session, Lawson approached one of the organizers to express his admiration for Denzel's courage and determination. Years turned into decades, and Denzel's influence only grew stronger. He eventually founded his own legal clinic, offering pro bono services to individuals facing discrimination or financial hardship. The clinic trained aspiring lawyers, instilling in them the same principles of empathy and integrity that guided Denzel throughout his career. Many of his former interns went on to hold influential positions in government agencies, nonprofits, and private firms, carrying forward his mission of leveling the playing field. In 2045, Denzel received an honorary doctorate from Northwestern University, recognizing his contributions to the field of law and society. During his acceptance speech, he reflected on the journey that had brought him there. "I didn't start out with grand ambitions," he admitted, scanning the crowd. "I just wanted to prove that fairness isn't negotiable. Along the way, I learned that real change happens when we lift each other up, not tear each other down." His words resonated deeply with attendees, drawing standing ovations and tears of inspiration. That night, surrounded by loved ones, including Angela, Lisa, and countless mentees, he allowed himself to feel the weight of his achievements. He thought back to the courtroom where it all began, remembering the judge's sneering remarks and the flicker of doubt that had threatened to consume him. But instead of bitterness, he felt gratitude for the challenges that forged his character and for the people who stood by him when the odds seemed insurmountable. As fireworks lit up the sky to celebrate the occasion, Denzel stepped outside, breathing in the cool evening air. He glanced at the stars, feeling a profound sense of peace. The road ahead would still present obstacles, but he knew he wasn't alone. Together, he and those he inspired would continue fighting for a world where justice truly belonged to everyone. And so, Denzel Carter's story came full circle, not as a tale of revenge or triumph over adversaries, but as a testament to the power of perseverance, humility, and hope. Through every setback and victory, he proved that ordinary people could spark extraordinary change, and in doing so, he ensured that his legacy would endure for generations to come. The days following Denzel's courtroom victory were a whirlwind of attention and emotion. News outlets across Chicago, and eventually beyond, picked up the story of the young man who had outsmarted a seasoned judge and exposed flaws in the legal system. Headlines like "Self-Taught Prodigy Wins Against All Odds" and "Justice Prevails," how Denzel Carter turned the tables, dominated newspapers, websites, and evening broadcasts. Social media buzzed with praise for Denzel, with hashtags like "Darn Fairness for All" trending nationwide. Denzel, however, wasn't prepared for the sudden spotlight. Growing up in a modest neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, he had always kept to himself, focusing on his studies and odd jobs to support his family. Fame or even recognition was something he never sought. Yet, as strangers stopped him on the street to congratulate him or shake his hand, he realized that his actions had resonated deeply with people who felt marginalized by the very system meant to protect them. Angela noticed the change in her brother almost immediately. While Denzel tried to stay humble, she could see the spark of pride in his eyes whenever someone thanked him for standing up against injustice. Still, she worried about how the newfound attention might affect him. One evening, as they sat together at their tiny kitchen table eating leftovers, Angela broached the subject. "You know," she said gently, "this is your moment, Denzel. People are listening to you now. What do you want to say?" Denzel looked up from his plate, surprised by the question. He hadn't thought much about what came next. For so long, his focus had been survival, working late nights at the diner, studying law books borrowed from the library during breaks, and helping Angela raise her 2 kids after their father walked out. But Angela's words made him pause. She was right. This was an opportunity, one he couldn't afford to waste. I want to remind people that justice isn't just for lawyers or judges, he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. It's for everyone. No matter where you come from, no matter what you look like, you deserve a fair shot. Angela smiled, warmly, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. That's exactly why they're drawn to you, Denzel. You've got this way of making complicated things simple. Don't lose that. Meanwhile, Judge Harold Mitchell found himself facing scrutiny of his own. Reporters dug into his past rulings, uncovering a pattern of harsh sentences handed down to defendants from minority communities. Critics accused him of bias, pointing to his behavior in Denzel's case as evidence of systemic prejudice within the judiciary. Calls for his removal grew louder, prompting an investigation by the State Judicial Review Board. At first, Judge Mitchell dismissed the backlash as temporary outrage fueled by sensationalism. He told himself that public opinion would shift once the hype died down. But when Robert Flynn, his longtime clerk, cautiously approached him with concerns, the judge began to feel uneasy. "Sir," Flynn said hesitantly during a quiet moment, in chambers, "I think we need to address this situation carefully. The board is taking these allegations seriously, and some members are questioning your conduct in open court." Mitchell slammed his fist on the desk, his face reddening with anger. "My conduct? That kid played the victim card, and now everyone's jumping on his bandwagon. Since when does being polite and prepared make someone a saint?" Flynn winced but pressed on. "It's not just about politeness, sir. It's about perception. People saw how you treated Mr. Carter, and it didn't sit well with them. If we don't handle this properly, it could damage your reputation permanently." Judge Mitchell sank into his chair, rubbing his temples. For the first time, he allowed himself to consider the possibility that he might have gone too far. His pride refused to let him admit fault, but deep down, he knew Flynn was right. Public trust was fragile, and once broken, it was nearly impossible to rebuild. Back in the community, Denzel's story inspired countless others. At local coffee shops, barbershops, and community centers, conversations turned to the idea of self-empowerment through education. People shared stories of their own struggles with the legal system, vowing to follow Denzel's example by learning their rights and speaking up when necessary. Even schools incorporated his case into civics lessons, using it as a real-world example of perseverance and resilience. Lisa Monroe kept her promise to mentor Denzel, meeting with him regularly to discuss potential career paths. Over coffee one afternoon, she encouraged him to apply to law school, emphasizing that scholarships and grants were available for talented students like him. "You've already proven you can hold your own in a courtroom," she said earnestly. "Imagine what you could accomplish with formal training." Denzel listened intently, his mind racing with possibilities. The idea of becoming a lawyer appealed to him, not for prestige or money, but because it offered a chance to help others navigate the complexities of the legal system. Still, doubts lingered. Could he really balance schoolwork with his responsibilities at home? And more importantly, could he afford it? As if reading his thoughts, Lisa pulled out a folder filled with information about financial aid programs and scholarship opportunities. "Look, Denzel," she said firmly, "you've worked hard enough to get here. Don't let fear stop you from chasing your dreams. There are people willing to invest in your future. You just have to take the first step." Her words struck a chord. That night, Denzel stayed up late researching law schools and drafting essays for scholarship applications. Each word he typed felt like a declaration of intent, a promise to himself and those who believed in him that he wouldn't squander this chance. Weeks later, news broke that Judge Mitchell had been reassigned to less prominent cases pending the outcome of the judicial review. Though he avoided removal from the bench, the incident left a stain on his career. Some colleagues distanced themselves from him, while others privately acknowledged the need for reform within the judiciary. For Denzel, the shift signaled progress, however small. When reporters asked him about the judge's fate, he responded diplomatically, saying only that accountability was essential for maintaining public trust. Privately, though, he hoped the experience would prompt broader discussions about fairness and equality in the courts. By spring, Denzel received acceptance letters from several law schools, each accompanied by generous scholarship offers. He chose Northwestern University, known for its commitment to social justice initiatives. On the day he enrolled, Angela brought the entire family to celebrate, tears streaming down her face as she hugged him tightly. "I always knew you'd do great things," she whispered. "Now the world will see it too." As Denzel settled into his new routine, attending lectures, participating in study groups, and interning at a nonprofit legal clinic, he carried the lessons of his journey with him. Every challenge he faced reminded him of the obstacles he'd overcome, fueling his determination to succeed. But amidst the excitement of his new life, Denzel remained grounded. He understood that true change required patience, persistence, and collaboration. And while he may have started as an underdog fighting for justice in a single courtroom, he now envisioned a future where he could advocate for fairness on a much larger scale. Unbeknownst to him, the ripple effects of his courage were spreading farther than he could imagine. Across the country, grassroots organizations began citing his case as inspiration for campaigns aimed at dismantling systemic barriers. Lawmakers referenced his story in debates about criminal justice reform, urging colleagues to prioritize equity and accessibility. In the end, Denzel's triumph wasn't just about winning a traffic violation case. It was about proving that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things when given the tools and opportunities to succeed. And as he stood on the brink of a promising new chapter, he vowed to use his voice and talents to ensure that others would have the same chance. The courtroom was quiet, save for the soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead and the occasional shuffle of papers. It wasn't a grand or imposing space, just a small room in a courthouse tucked away in downtown Chicago. The walls were painted, a dull beige, and rows of wooden benches filled with curious onlookers lined the back. At the front sat a raised platform where Judge Harold Mitchell presided over cases with an air of authority that bordered on arrogance. His reputation preceded him. He was known to be harsh, impatient, and often dismissive of defendants who didn't meet his standards. Today's case seemed insignificant compared to others he had handled. A young man named Denzel Carter stood at the defendant's table, accused of running a red light. To most people in the room, it appeared routine. A minor traffic violation unlikely to stir much excitement. But there was something about Denzel that caught the attention of those watching. He wasn't dressed in expensive clothes like some of the lawyers who frequented the courthouse. Instead, he wore a slightly worn suit, its fabric faded but clean and pressed. His posture was straight, his hands resting calmly on the table as he waited for the proceedings to begin. There was no trace of nervousness in his expression, only quiet confidence. Judge Mitchell glanced down at the file before him. "Denzel Carter," he said, his voice loud and commanding, cutting through the silence. "You're here today because Officer Lawson claims you ran a red light at the intersection of 5th and Main last week." Denzel nodded politely. "Yes, Your Honor." "Do you have legal representation?" the judge asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "No, sir," Denzel replied evenly. "I'm representing myself." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Self-representation wasn't unheard of, especially in cases like this, but it usually ended poorly for the defendant. Most judges appreciated when someone hired a lawyer. It saved time and reduced the likelihood of procedural errors. Judge Dito Mitchell frowned deeply, clearly unimpressed. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the bench, and studied Denzel with cold eyes. "You think you can handle this yourself?" the judge asked, his voice dripping with skepticism. "This isn't some game show, son. You need to know what you're doing." "I understand, Your Honor," Denzel said without hesitation. His voice was calm and steady, betraying none of the tension that might have been simmering beneath the surface. "I've done my research, and I believe I can present my side effectively. The Judge let out a short laugh devoid of humor. Research, is that what you call reading a few articles online? Let me tell you something, Mr. Carter. This courtroom is no place for amateurs. Denzel didn't respond immediately. He simply held the judge's gaze, his dark eyes unwavering. For a moment, the two men locked stares, one exuding power and disdain, the other radiating quiet resolve. The contrast between them couldn't have been more stark. Finally, Judge Mitchell shook his head and turned to Officer Greg Lawson, who was seated nearby. "All right, Officer Lawson," the judge barked. "State your case." Lawson stood up, adjusting his uniform as he cleared his throat. "Your Honor, on the night in question, I observed Mr. Carter approaching the intersection at 5th and Main. The light was clearly red, yet he proceeded to drive through it without stopping. I pulled him over immediately and issued a citation." The officer's testimony was delivered matter-of-factly, leaving little room for doubt. From the perspective of everyone in the room, it sounded like an open and shut case. Running a red light was a straightforward offense, and Lawson's account appeared credible enough. Still, Judge Mitchell decided to push further. "Mr. Carter," he said, turning his attention back to Denzel. "What do you have to say for yourself? Did you run the light, or didn't you?" Denzel took a deep breath before speaking. "Your Honor, I did not run the red light. When I approached the intersection, visibility was extremely poor due to ongoing construction work and heavy fog. Based on the conditions, I believe the light was green and proceeded accordingly. Unfortunately, Officer Lawson misinterpreted the situation." For a brief second, the judge looked surprised. This wasn't the typical response he received from defendants in traffic cases. Most either admitted guilt or denied everything outright, without offering explanations. Denzel's measured tone and logical reasoning were unexpected and irritating. Judge Mitchell narrowed his eyes, scrutinizing the young man before him. "You expect us to believe that?" The judge snapped. "That you, a civilian, somehow assessed the lighting conditions better than a trained police officer?" "I'm not claiming superiority, Your Honor," Denzel replied calmly. "I'm merely stating the facts as I experienced them. Poor visibility affected both myself and Officer Lawson. I would argue that it created reasonable doubt regarding whether I actually violated any laws." The judge scoffed. "Reasonable doubt? That's rich coming from someone who probably doesn't even know what Miranda rights are." His words carried a sneer, and several people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They could sense the hostility brewing between the judge and the defendant. But Denzel remained unfazed. If anything, the judge's condescending remarks only strengthened his resolve. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I may not be a lawyer, but I am familiar with the law, and I believe the burden of proof lies with the prosecution, not me." Now, it was Judge Mitchell's turn to bristle. He gripped the edge of his bench, his knuckles whitening as he fought to maintain composure. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Defendants were meant to cower under his authority, not challenge him with textbook legalese. Something about Denzel's demeanor unnerved him, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. "Listen here, Mr. Carter," the judge growled, leaning forward menacingly. "You don't belong in this courtroom. People like you should stick to what they know best instead of wasting our time with these ridiculous defenses. People like you." The phrase hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. Everyone in the room froze, unsure of how Denzel would react. Some expected anger, others resignation. What they got was neither. Instead, Denzel tilted his head slightly, his expression thoughtful rather than combative. "If by people like me you mean individuals committed to seeking justice, then I agree. I do belong here. Justice shouldn't discriminate based on race, income, or education level. It belongs to everyone equally." His words struck a chord, eliciting murmurs of approval from the spectators. Even Officer Lawson seemed taken aback, glancing nervously at the judge. Judge Mitchell, however, was livid. His face reddened as he slammed his gavel down hard enough to make the sound echo throughout the room. "That's enough," he shouted. "One more word out of you, and I'll hold you in contempt. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," Denzel said softly, bowing his head slightly in acknowledgement. Yet despite his outward compliance, there was a spark in his eyes, a flicker of defiance that refused to dim. As the trial continued, it became increasingly clear that this wouldn't be a simple traffic case. Judge Mitchell's prejudice had ignited a fire within Denzel, pushing him to rise above the insults and prove himself. Little did anyone know, least of all the judge, that Denzel possessed a secret weapon, years of self-taught legal expertise hidden behind his humble exterior. And as the day wore on, the courtroom would witness firsthand just how formidable a force he truly was.